I'm joined now to talk about this by the writer and political commentator Adam Schwarz. Hello, Adam.
Good to be with you.
Quite a day yesterday. I mean, the rally of the right wing descended into violence. People climbed on national monuments, urinated on churches and hospitals, threw bottles. 26 police were injured. A black man left unconscious on the ground while being kicked. Threats to kill the Prime Minister. Calls that violence is coming from the world's richest man beamed into the event, and 25 arrests. Is that what patriotism looks like these days in this country?
Well, I think for the vast majority of law-abiding people in this country, it certainly won't. But there's certainly been a huge amount of debate over the nature of the event. But really, it had all of the visual and content hallmarks of a traditional far-right British nationalist protest. It was visually dominated by Union and St George's flags. It was overwhelmingly attended by men. And it was ideologically rooted in a defensive belief that native British culture or identity was being suppressed or threatened in some way. But I think really, as you mentioned, the thing that made this distinctive was the fact that it was 100,000 people were in attendance. And of course, that made it the largest far-right event in British history. And I think for anyone who wants to see the UK remain a liberal, tolerant democracy, yesterday's march was a deeply disturbing event. And I think particularly for those of us in London who identify with the city's liberal, tolerant, cosmopolitan environment, felt this event was largely kind of juxtapositioned with their own sense of national identity and values. So I think as part of this, there was sort of a metropolitan-rural divide on display here, with actually many of the attendees reportedly coming from outside of London.
It's odd, the flag thing, though, isn't it? I mean, you go to another country and you see their flags everywhere. You go to America, people regularly fly flags from their houses, and it's just a symbol of belonging, a symbol of being proud of your country. How's it been twisted in this country?
Well, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, primarily a national flag should be exactly that. It should be your ability as a citizen to demonstrate your patriotism in the nation. But it can be a way for extremists to take advantage of it and actually to present it as something is very much not. And of course, as I mentioned, it's really quite typical for far-right protests in this country to display normally the St George's flag. I think something that was a little bit different yesterday was the fact that actually it seemed to be overwhelmingly Union flags. And I think that was probably a deliberate attempt by the organisers to try to distance this to some extent from those traditional far-right protests that we see in a way to hopefully galvanise a greater part of the British public. So ultimately, as we know, the flag should be something that we are all able to get behind. But unfortunately, too often it's something that extremists try to hijack.
Yeah, and they try to hijack it, but it's almost as though we give it to them. It's theirs now. Might the best way to actually tackle that and take it back is to flood the place with flags. I mean, other countries do it. America does it. You go to countries in Europe and you'll see their flag everywhere, but not so much here.
I think that does make sense, in terms of trying to reclaim its ownership. I think in reality, just due to the nature of displaying a flag, it can mean one thing to one person and something completely different to another. And I think when you have the current environment that we're in, which is where flags, unfortunately, St George's flags are being used as a sort of way to express nativism and a sense of hostility toward people who are not necessarily from this country, really it's important not to try to add fuel to the fire by trying to reclaim it in this exact moment, but I think rather to try to restore calm and then let's sort of have a more grown-up, rational, sober debate over this once this sort of heat of the moment has passed.
It's a neat trick, though, isn't it, for them to attach flags on lampposts and anything else that stands still long enough, because the council, at great expense to the taxpayer, will then have to trail around after them, taking the flags down. And that will give the people who put them up in the first place the opportunity to say, well, there you are, you see, don't you love your country?
Well, that's exactly what this is, and it's attempt to provoke a reaction in a way that will create a kind of visual demonstration of the flag or the nativist culture being suppressed. And that's really why it's so difficult to actually combat this, because actually, ultimately, if you are going to be vandalizing public property, whether that's spray painting a roundabout or putting up flags on lampposts where they shouldn't be, ultimately, the council has to react to that. And so I think, this is really part of the typical ways in which the far right tries to exploit populations and tries to radicalize populations by forcing moderates into various courses of action which make them look like they are in fact doing, which the far right is claiming that they're doing. So I think this is really a very difficult thing to respond to. And of course, we saw Labour respond in a very interesting way. Yvette Cooper, a couple of weeks ago, when she was asked about this, mentioned she had about 10 different versions of the flag in her house. And I think that was probably a way of overcompensating that didn't really have much credibility. I think Keir Starmer's approach, which was to basically caution against the way that can be exploited, but also to demonstrate pride, was a much more sensible approach.
Are we in an unusual time in this country now? Because we've always had this kind of feeling among a certain number of people, and it's always been, fairly stable, 8, 10, 12%, something like that, going back to the Second World War, and they've shown themselves under different monikers. They've been various political parties, but they've all always had this about the same sort of support. Is it different now?
I think we are rapidly seeing a radicalization in this country, and indeed across the wider Western world, that we haven't seen for a very long time. Certainly, really since the end of the Second World War, expressed support for the far right, whether that was in hyper-nationalism or in racism, was really considered to be politically toxic. And actually any parties or movements that tried to move in that direction were really, not rewarded by electorates. And so what we're seeing is far-right movements instead shift their tactics to, instead of talking about, for example, ethnic supremacy, they're talking about national identity or cultural identity. And I think that is a model that seems to be producing results for them, and is actually resulting in a huge swathe of support really across the Western world for far right or populist right movements. I think it's really important also to consider the role of social media in all of this, because I think the speed that we are seeing the British public embrace the far right is particularly concerning, and it really coincides with the weaponization of social media. I think particularly on the X platform, notably yesterday, which Elon Musk addressed at his rally, he's really exploiting the platform to kind of turn it into a far-right disinformation vehicle through manipulating the algorithms to boost extremist content. And I think really, we have newly introduced laws through the Online Safety Act to actually tackle online behavior and manipulation that results in population radicalization. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be actually being enforced yet. So I think really it's extremely concerning for norms that have really ensured the stability of British democracy really come apart in such a rapid and dramatic way.
Yes, that's a pretty fundamental point, isn't it? Should a man be allowed to address a crowd and call for a revolutionary change of government, for the people to be marshalled and take charge, to tell the crowd they need to fight back or die? That seems to cross a line, certainly. Does your ability to incite a crowd like that hinge on how much money you've got?
Well, I think that is exactly to the heart of the point. We know that Elon Musk has very much pitched, his view to Western publics on this idea of free speech being suppressed. And that's really been his primary line of argument against the Starmer government, which he has really been repeatedly attempting to destabilize. And of course, I think the reason why he is making these incredibly provocative statements that really brush up against our free speech laws, because they actually drift into incitement, are deliberately to provoke the kind of reaction that we were talking about just a few minutes ago, where moderates and even law enforcement authorities have to investigate him. And that results in it appearing that the far right are right in what they say about free speech being suppressed. So I think it's something that we do need to monitor incredibly closely. But I think there's a second point, really, to Elon Musk addressing the rally yesterday, and that is that supposedly the rally was all about taking back control, kind of in the guise of Brexit even, and nativism and Britishness. And so the idea that you have a foreign billionaire who is directly intervening in British politics, for me, is not consistent with the principles of what the far right are claiming to support. It just seems completely absurd. And of course, everyone cheers for him. In reality, he has very few links to the UK other than business. And it seems to be completely inappropriate for him to be intervening in British public life in such a dramatic and deliberate way.